Hello, and a very good evening to you. Today I'm going to cover a very intriguing topic, which is could the coronavirus be the pale horse from Revelation? I've seen a lot of YouTube comments making this claim or making this statement or making this hypothesis, and this is just going to be my hypothesis, my opinion. This does not fit with any kind of pre-trib, post-trib, trib, millennial, da 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 da. Partly because I don't really care what all of those theories are because nobody knows, and partly because since nobody knows, this is just me sort of starting from scratch and looking at the facts that I can see and putting together, does this fit? So let's just dive in and see. Let's start by actually reading what it says. So this is where it talks about the pale horse from Revelation 6. I would actually encourage you to read Revelation 5 as well for additional context, because the setup for this is that John weeps because no one is found to open the scrolls. No one is found worthy to open the seals on this scroll. And it's only when the Lamb of God appears and he's found worthy that the seals can even be opened. So that's interesting. The Lamb of God is the one that's opening these seals. That means that for us who are Christians, this is our Savior. This is Jesus calling the shots here. So we might be looking at this as China, we might be looking at this as a government, we might be looking at this as who knows what, but if we're seeing the pale horse ride forth, which I don't know if we can definitively say, but we'll look at a hypothesis here. But if no matter which horse ever rides forth, it's sent forth by the sovereign Lord who's sitting in the heavens. So that gives us a lot of security, because this is not just random. This is not just something that we're out of control. This is something that our Savior is doing. Whoa, that's pretty crazy. Now I'm going to just read through this real quick. Revelation 6. And I saw when the Lamb opened one of the seals, and I heard as it were the noise of thunder, one of the four beasts saying, "Come and see." And I saw, and behold, a white horse, and he that sat on him had a bow, and a crown was given unto him, and he went forth conquering and to conquer. And when he had opened the second seal, I heard the second beast say, "Come and see." And there went out another horse that was red, and power was given to him that sat thereon to take peace from the earth, and that they should kill one another. And there was given unto him a great sword. And when he had opened the third seal, I heard the third beast say, "Come and see." And I beheld, and lo, a black horse, and he that sat on him had a pair of balances in his hand. And I heard a voice in the midst of the four beasts say, "A measure of wheat for a penny, and 3 measures of barley for a penny, and see thou hurt not the oil and the wine." And when he had opened the fourth seal, I heard the voice of the fourth beast say, "Come and see." And I looked, and behold, a pale horse, and his name that sat on him was Death, and hell followed with him. And power was given unto them over the fourth part of the earth, to kill with sword, and with hunger, and with death, and with the beasts of the earth. And when he had opened the fifth seal, I saw under the altar the souls of them that were slain for the word of God and for the testimony which they held. And they cried with a loud voice, saying, "How long, O Lord, holy and true, dost thou not judge and avenge our blood on them that dwell on the earth?" And white robes were given unto them, unto every one of them. And it was said unto them that they should rest yet for a little season, until their fellow servants also and their brethren that should be killed as they were should be fulfilled. And I beheld when he had opened the sixth seal, and lo, there was a great earthquake, and the sun became black as sackcloth of hair, and the moon became as blood. And the stars of heaven fell unto the earth, even as a fig tree casteth her untimely figs, when she is shaken of a mighty wind. And the heaven departed as a scroll when it is rolled together, and every mountain and island were moved out of their places. And the kings of the earth, and the great men, and the rich men, and the chief captains, and the mighty men, and every bondman, and every free man, hid themselves in the dens and in the rocks of the mountains, and said to the mountains and rocks, "Fall on us, and hide us from the face of him that sitteth on the throne, and from the wrath of the Lamb. For the great day of his wrath is come, and who shall be able to stand?" Whoa, that's Revelation 6. So let's just look at the four horsemen alone. We could go into, whoa, the fifth seal, if this is the fourth one, and the fifth one is that there's a bunch of people who have been killed for their faith. And then, the sixth one is that the people are just, they're aware that the wrath of God has come to this world. So we're definitely not to that point yet, but let's just look, because if we're at the pale horse, which some people are theorizing and hypothesizing, then that means that we've had to have seen the other three go forth in the sequence. And I don't know if we've seen that yet. So have they ridden forth? Let's look at them one at a time. Okay, so the pale horse to start with said, "Behold a pale horse, and his name that sat on him was Death, and hell followed with him. And power was given unto them over the fourth part of the earth, to kill with sword, and with hunger, and with death, and with the beasts of the earth." Okay, a couple of little observations here. 1/4 of the earth's population dies. Death is seated on the horse, and hell is followed along with him. I don't know if that is, I don't know what that exactly means, but it may be that it's not just quick and instant death. It's, if people are killed with hunger, like starvation is miserable as you go through it. And I think that, this coronavirus is a miserable disease because it's like drowning in your own lungs phlegm. And so it may imply a great degree of suffering. If people are killed with the beasts of the earth, that's a lot of suffering. Like people, getting killed by a bear or a mountain lion or a wolf or whatever, like that's terrifying. But let's just look at, does this fit with the coronavirus? Notice that pestilence is not mentioned in this verse. Pestilence would be the biblical word that I would expect to see here if it was specifically implying a disease, unless that phrase "kill with death" applies here. Now, when it says to kill with sword, that's, you're killed with a weapon. If you're killed with hunger, then you starve to death. What does it even mean to kill with death? That's a little ambiguous. If you're killed, you die, but how do you kill somebody with death? What does that even mean? That may be a sickness, so that's not really clear. There's another word that could have been used to indicate sickness, so maybe this could fall into that bucket. Not really sure. And with the beasts of the earth. Okay, but pestilence is not mentioned, so that's right away saying this doesn't necessarily automatically fit just yet. Now, if we are experiencing the pale horse right now, then we can see that we've got a lot more than just a coronavirus disease coming down the pike. So I don't know if we really want this to be the pale horse, not that we have any control over that anyway. So is it plausible that everything mentioned here could be occurring? Are people going to be killed with sword? Possibly. It seems like China is trying to pick a fight and blame the United States for the virus and, try to stir up, I don't know, seems like they're a little antagonistic here. With hunger, there's a huge locust plague going around in Africa. Little weird, a little bit, indicative that there's, going to be food shortages at least over there. I'm curious if in America, if the fields will be planted. We'll just have to keep our eyes open this spring. Watch in March, April, May, June, whenever the season is for the area in that part of the world. It's March 1st today, so are the fields going to be planted, or they might not get planted because of quarantine? If they don't get planted, then presumably the world has enough food to last until fall, but then they would be expecting another harvest this fall. If the fields don't get planted this spring, that's going to be a problem. Let's just keep our eyes open about that. With death, that's not really clear what that means. So is that fitting in with this? It could be that it means that you're sickened to death. And with the beasts of the earth, we're definitely not seeing that going on, other than random one-off occasions of hikers that get that. But that's not like somebody's riding forth on a horse and lots of people are dying from the beasts of the earth. What I think could be plausible is this coronavirus is already setting up an us and them, like an other, a quarantine, like people who have been infected versus people who haven't. That could create a ton of prejudice, and that could cause the people who are infected to be driven away from the face of, from society. And then what are they going to be doing? They're going to be in tents, they're going to be outside, they're going to be like roaming, looking for what they can scrounge. And then they could be killed by the beasts of the earth. So, and not given any hospitality by anybody who's not infected, because there's this super great fear that, you're going to be one of the casualties if you get infected. So, kind of in a zombie apocalypse sort of way, people will be like barring the gates and battening down the hatches against the infected people if they can possibly contain themselves and not get infected themselves. That could be a scenario that I could see. So I don't have a definitive thing here, but before this can be definitive in the first place, we have to back up and see, well, what has to happen right before this? Right before this has to be the black horse. Well, have we seen that in the world yet? The black horse said, "He that sat on him had a pair of balances in his hand. And I heard a voice in the midst of the four beasts say, A measure of wheat for a penny, and 3 measures of barley for a penny. And see thou hurt not the oil and the wine." Okay, that's really interesting. I've always read this and thought, okay, but does that mean that food is going to be really cheap, or does that mean that food is going to be really expensive? I could see it going both ways. It could be that, wheat and barley are really expensive, but oil and wine are really cheap. Or it could be that food as a whole is really, really cheap. So unpacking this really comes down to the meaning of the word measure, how big is that, and the meaning of the word penny, how much money is that? Well, let's dig into that and see what we can discover. The word used for measure here is the Greek word koinix, and that's only ever used 2 times in the New Testament here in this verse. So it's used 2 times, a measure of wheat, 3 measures of barley. So that's the only instances of the word koinix in the whole New Testament. But what Thayer's Greek lexicon says it means is a dry measure containing less than our quart or liter, or as much as would support a man of moderate appetite for a day. And then the word penny is the word denarion. That's used 16 times in the New Testament, and that typically means a day's wages. So it was in Matthew 20, verse 2, "And when he had agreed with the laborers for a penny a day, he sent them into his vineyard." And also in the parable of the Good Samaritan, the guy took out 2 pence and gave them to the host, the innkeeper, and said, "Take care of him." So it could have been like 2 days' wages for taking care of this guy. Might have lasted more than, I don't know if he was gone for a weekend or how long he was gone, but so it's like a hospital fee for a guy for an undetermined amount of time for him to be gone and come back. But then the Mark verse is interesting, where when they were in the feeding of the 5,000, the disciples estimated that 200 pennyworth of bread would have fed 5,000 men besides women and children. So obviously at that time, 200 pennyworth of bread would have bought like 5,000 plus portions of food. So this is a very different amount of, this is a very different thing than one measure, like one portion of food for a guy for 1 day's wages. This would be like 200 days' wages for 5,000 people. So in other words, your food is a lot cheaper in this Mark verse, in this Mark scenario. Okay, so there's one set of data that would support sort of the idea that food is really, really expensive. You're working all day long just for the food that you eat that day. That doesn't leave room for your housing and your clothes and your medical and your shelter and whatever else your life comes with. It's much less entertainment, or that would seem to indicate a very, very subsistence level existence for people. But it's still a little weird that it says, "See that thou hurt not the oil and the wine." How could oil and wine be not hurt, and those are easily available? Or how could anything be easily available if people are using all of their money just on food? Then the oil and the wine, is it that people are going to be freely able to pursue their addictions in the middle of this scenario, but then that doesn't really fit with oil? So this is just a little confusing. Let's see if we can dig into it a little bit deeper. So there's this verse, which is a very interesting parallel. Then Elisha said, Hear ye the word of the Lord. Thus saith the Lord, Tomorrow about this time shall a measure of fine flour be sold for a shekel, and 2 measures of barley for a shekel in the gate of Samaria. Now this was a scenario that meant that food was going to be super, astonishingly, shockingly cheap. This was in the middle of a siege around the city where food was so expensive that a lady ate her baby. And so there's and then this prophecy was laughed at by one of the lords that the king, was around the king. So this meant food's going to be really, really cheap. So cheap that you wouldn't be able to believe it. Now, in this verse, let's just compare whether these are the same words. Like the word for measure here is not the same word. In the Septuagint, they use the word metron to translate this word measure in both places. This is an apparently primary word, a measure, which is where we get our word meter, literally or figuratively by implication, a limited portion. So this is just a very general, ambiguous word that means measure. It doesn't specify any specific quantity. But let's go more specific than that, because this was not written in Greek, it was written in Hebrew. I just wanted to see if the Greek word in the Septuagint would have matched the word koinix that we saw earlier, but it didn't. Now the Hebrew word was what would have been in the original language, and that was the word sia. Okay, so let's look at sia. So the word sia in this verse is also used in a couple of other places. This 1/3 of an ephah is a guess. That's just sort of a question mark thing in the definitions that I read. And I searched around, and I think online sources said that an ephah would be about a bushel. In our modern day, I really couldn't find any definitive information about this, but I did see some information where the Bible was using the word ephah in different contexts. These verses are very interesting to look up. One of them says that 10 omers make an ephah. And this Zechariah passage says that a woman is sitting in the middle of an ephah. So that's kind of like a basket that a woman could sit in. That's a pretty big quantity. So, but we don't really know if this sia is exactly 1/3 of an ephah. So let's look at this verse. And if a man shall sanctify unto the Lord some part of a field of his possession, then thy estimation shall be according to the seed thereof. An homer of barley seed shall be valued at 50 shekels of silver. Now this, I thought this was very interesting, because in Exodus 16:36, it said that there were 10 omers, spelled differently, O-M-E-R, not H-O-M-E-R, but I'm thinking it's the same thing. 10 omers make an ephah. And then this says that 1 homer of barley seed will be valued at 50 shekels of silver. And then this was centuries later, and for 2 measures of barley for 1 shekel to be that is pretty cheap. Like if it was in the book of Leviticus, which was in the time before the Israelites even got into their land, that 1 homer of barley seed would be 50 shekels of silver. Things generally get more expensive, not less, over time, and then this is 2 measures of barley for a shekel. Like, whoa. I don't know. That really struck me as an indication of how shockingly cheap this means that this food was. Then the word sia is also used in other verses, so it's variable. In this verse, Genesis 18:6, it looks about the food for 3 people, because this is when Abraham saw the Lord, and it was 3 men, and he went to the tent unto Sarah and said, Make ready quickly 3 measures of fine meal, knead it and make cakes upon the hearth. The word measures is that same word sia, but they also killed a calf for this, so there's probably other people eating, so it's maybe more than 3 people. not really sure. In a different place, food for 400 to 600, 5 measures of parched corn, but along with a whole bunch of other stuff. So, and it was a gift. It's not necessarily the case that it was going to suffice all of those 400 to 600 people. So again, not really clear how big the measure is. And then in this verse where Elijah was with the prophets of Baal, and he dug a trench as great as would contain 2 measures of seed. Remember that he then filled that trench with 12 barrels of water, and that was supposed to represent a lot, where it's like, oh my goodness, he is drenching this altar with, just soaking it with water. And then it said that the fire licked up all the water in the trench. So again, it's not necessarily the case that we know how much it is. We just know it's supposed to be sort of a big quantity. So yeah, it's a little bit variable here as far as what that means. So let's just summarize all of this. Two options: food equals cheap or food equals expensive with the black horse. Let's just explore the food equals cheap hypothesis. It doesn't seem to make sense for food to be expensive while oil and wine are cheap. That parallel verse in 2 Kings means that food is shockingly cheap, and there's a close enough construction there. I mean, the Bible interprets itself, so I don't know if there's any inferences that we can draw into that or not. And the amount that would have been 1/10 of an ephah at 50 shekels in the Leviticus passage versus an amount that might have been at 1/3 of an ephah at 1 shekel in the 2 Kings passage, that's really, really cheap. Even if we don't take into account this, we can just take into account the story itself, where that prophecy was laughed at by the guard. Now let's contrast that, the food equals expensive category. The word in the verse was measure, that seems to mean 1 day's food for one guy. And the word in the verse for penny was 1 day's wages for one guy. That still doesn't explain to us what the oil and the wine thing means, but here's what I would say. We have just been through the period in history where arguably food was the cheapest for a lot of people than it has ever been. Food is such a fraction of your daily expenses. Food is so available. Food is so ready. We can eat whatever we want. And yes, there's people who struggle to buy food. I don't want to minimize that. But for probably the greatest proportion of the world's people in history, food has been very readily accessible at a very, very low price in comparison with your other expenses in life. So food, housing, clothing, medical, whatever, just the things that comprise your daily life, education, you name it. Food is just such a small sliver of that pie right now. And that's been the case since like the 1950s or so, basically post-World War II. And so this has been a boom, at least in America. My frame of reference is America. I know that there are other countries where this is not the case, not even remotely. I've been in Haiti, so I've seen, poverty up close and know that that's not for the whole entire world. So maybe this has to be for the whole entire world when the black horse goes. It's not really clear, but I'm just saying, do the facts fit? Maybe this food equals cheap thing fits the black horse. Or alternatively, this food equals expensive thing could be what we're headed for if this is the black horse instead of the pale horse. And if the economy crashes and food becomes really expensive because of this disease, who knows? Okay, but before the black horse, we would have had to have seen the red horse. So have we seen that? The red horse said, "And there went out another horse that was red, and power was given to him that sat thereon to take peace from the earth, and that they should kill one another, and there was given unto him a great sword." Okay, so let's just say that the black horse was this period of insane prosperity that we've seen in the world, where there was a middle class for the first time like ever, and a lot of regular people could just have very good, comfortable lives, and food was really cheap. So right before that, what happened? World War I and II. Talk about taking peace from the earth. World War I and II. This was the entire globe pretty much, we call it that. There were countries that weren't involved. They were neutral, but this was an unprecedented event in world history. How many people died in World War I and II? Not to mention how many people died under the dictatorships of communism. People like Lenin and Stalin and Mao, and a lot of other people that I don't know enough history to name, who also killed a lot of people, like cruel dictators where a lot of people died. Tens of millions or hundreds of millions of people died under the influence of communism. And communism is what color? It's red. Interesting. And also that was a season where the great sword, like, it says there was given unto him a great sword. This is a period of history where we've had greater weapons technology than any other time before. So, up until this point, the weapons have been all through world history, arrows and stuff, and horses and armor and whatever. So like the ballistics and the tanks and the aircraft and just the weapons that we have now are enormous. I mean, just out of proportion to what was there, what existed in the rest of the period before this in world history. Okay, so maybe we could plausibly say, that's kind of looking like it could fit. So, but wait, the white horse had to go right before that. So what could that have been? And the white horse, this is what it said. He that sat on him had a bow, and a crown was given unto him. And he went forth conquering and to conquer. Okay, well, let's see if that could fit any events that we know of before, like World War I and II era. A bow is more of an archaic weapon by today's standards, so it could be like the period, 19th or 18th century, or 19th century and previous. A crown represents monarchy, it represents royalty. And conquering, we did see a period of colonialization, or this expansion by these empires. So it was England, it was France, it was Spain, it was the Dutch, it was Portugal. And there was this saying, I think the saying has been applied to different places, but like, the sun never sets on the British Empire. Britain was enormous because they had colonies all over the place. They had Africa, they had Hong Kong, they had, they had India, they had Hong Kong, they had places in Africa, they had the eastern seaboard of the United States. They had just this enormous empire. And that was not just confined to Britain. I mean, look at Spain and the conquistadores and the way that they went down in South America and conquered all of that territory. And same thing with Portugal and France and the Dutch. Like there were all of these islands and small nations and peoples that were conquered and sort of reigned over by these nations. Interesting. That's what the white horse went forth to do, is to conquer. Okay, so it's kind of interesting. Seems like it's kind of fitting with world events in that way. Maybe, maybe that could be plausible. So let's just sum up what we've looked at. I think it's possible that the white and the red horses have already ridden forth. That seems like a little bit too close of a match for it to be just a coincidence. So that means that maybe this could be the black horse, or maybe this could be the the pale horse. So if the black horse means that food is really cheap, then this may have already happened. In that case, maybe we could be at the end of that season of the black horse, and now we're ushering the pale horse. Not sure. Or if the black horse means that food is really expensive, then maybe right now this is the black horse starting to ride forth and food is going to start to be really expensive for a season. That's just up in the air. I don't think we can draw a conclusion about that, but I do think here's one thing we can say. If this coronavirus is just an illness, even if it's a worldwide pandemic, then it is not possible that we're looking at one of the horses here. Why? Because there have been illnesses that have swept the globe again and again and again and again and again, and you can't say that every time that was one of the Revelation events. Probably every generation in history that had an illness go through like this, they thought, what is this in Revelation? And we probably naturally think that too. So if this only is just confined to being just an illness, then we can sort of dismiss this as being like a pale horse type of character. We can just say, the world has seen other pandemics. There was the Black Death that killed a fourth of the population of Europe. There was the Spanish flu that killed like 50 to 100 million people in 1918, 1919. Just because we're having a worldwide major illness does not mean that this is one of the horses in Revelation. But if we start to see some of those other things that also go along with the pale horse, so there's 4 things that we would be seeing. Kill with the sword, kill with hunger, kill with death, and kill with the beasts of the earth. And it's, death and hell are sort of reigning in that season. Those are the criteria that we would need to see for something like this to be considered the pale horse, or for us to think that it might be. I don't think that we see those 4 criteria right now. So at this point, it's too early to tell. But as things unfold, we can just keep our eyes open and keep sort of keep that in limbo and say, well, I'm not going to draw any firm conclusions here, but if I do start to see these other parts of this taking place at the same time, then I'm going to think like, whoa, okay, then we're going to be probably seeing a lot of believers put to death, because the 5th horse, the 5th seal, is the souls of those who've been beheaded for the witness of Jesus under the altar, crying out to God, when will you avenge our blood? And that's going to be a really painful time for a lot of people. So just be close to the Lord. I don't want this to be fearful. I want this to be a thing to stimulate you, to drive you to the Lord, drive you to the Word, drive you to prayer, drive you to really just grab hold of your faith and strengthen yourself now while you have time.